All right, so once your folders are set up, go onto your P drive, and there should be or might be a Maya folder on your P drive, okay? Do you see a Maya folder on your P drive?
Yep, Maya.
Yep, okay. So all of Maya's preferences get saved right into this Maya folder. So anytime that you make a change inside the software, it saves it into this folder. So when you go and you open up a file, they have that recently opened files, that gets saved into this area. So what we want to do today is we want to delete that folder. Oops. So open up the Maya folder, and you should see something that says 2018. Okay, those are the specific preferences for our version of Maya that we're going to use. So delete your 2018 folder. I'm just renaming mine because I actually don't want to delete mine because mine's already set up for other stuff. Okay?
Just click and press delete?
Yep, just click and press delete. Okay, so now the preferences are gone. So when we open up Maya, it'll say, do you want to create default preferences if there was a previous version, or it'll just create them automatically, okay? And the idea with that is, let's say there's 5 Maya classes running. The first class comes in, they do some stuff with the interface. The second class comes in, they do something different. The third class comes in. By the 5th class, the preferences are jacked up, okay? They're just all over the place. This way, you're able to take that 2018 folder and save it every time you come in, or load it every time you come in, and have your same preferences every single day. When you go home, same thing. You can copy these preferences and use them. The interface in Maya is probably the best one that I've ever used, so we want to save that. Typically, people who work in the software will take their preferences with them and move to wherever they're working and make sure they have their preferences loaded. Okay, so now we're going to open up Maya. You should do this the best way, which is clicking the Windows key and then just typing Maya and then hitting enter. When you see Maya 2018 come up. Yep. Now my version is 2018.5. The ones here might be, I think, 0.3 or 0.2. It doesn't matter. What we're going to do in here is going to be the same thing. The 0.5 is just bug fixes, basically, right? If we went to 2019, the versions don't save down, okay? We have to specifically make sure we click the buttons to save it down. It doesn't automatically save it to the previous one. It doesn't affect us in here, but just be aware of that for future lessons. If you go during the summer 2019 comes out and you want to play with it. Come on. There's a pop-up that's going to happen. If I continue, I know the pop-up will come in right when I don't want it to. I'm still thinking. Okay, so typically you'll get 1 or 2 pop-ups. There's one. This pop-up is saying we want to highlight anything that's new. For most of you in the class, you've never used Maya before, so everything is new, okay? So it doesn't matter either way. I typically don't show this at startup. And then I hit OK. The other pop-up might be something about a survey. Do you want to upload your usage to Autodesk? Whatever you want to do, it doesn't matter, okay? I'm just going to make mine fit the screen a little bit better. There we go. Am I cut off? I am cut off. You can't see my menu items. The downside of the projector and my laptop is that they don't like to talk together nicely. There we go. Cool. All right, so we can see everything on my screen. All right, so just a little brief tour of the interface. The very top, you have just like you have in every other software, just a menu bar, right? File, edit, create, select, blah, blah, blah. All the way down that list. What is unique about Maya is that menu bar can be changed, okay? Think about Cinema. You would go into that top right thing that said general or standard, and you could switch to different menus or modes or workspaces, right? Very similar to that is how Maya can function. So we do have this drop down here where you can change all of those things. Or if you just simply want to change which menu item you're working on at the top, you click on this modeling area and you pick which one you want to work on. So if I want to work in the rigging, I would click rigging. If I want to work on FX, I would click FX. And that changes these menu items at the very, very top. Rendering, same thing. Now your F2, F3, F4 keys on your keyboard will also cycle through all of those different menus. Okay, so as I hit the F2 at the very top, F3, F4, you'll see how that also cycles through each one of those. So it's good to have that because you may want to use it as a hotkey and constantly switch between these things. Most people don't, but it's good to have that ability, right? Also, it used to be H. It's not on the hotkey list, but H you used to be able to hold down and click, and then you'd be able to switch it. They must have got rid of that. That's fine. Okay, so here's modeling, rigging, animation, FX, rendering, blah, blah, blah. Now, move your mouse into the center of your screen and hold down the space bar. This is the Hotbox. So every single one of those different menu selections that change at the top, this is all of those menus in one area. Typically, people will use this more than they will use those top menus inside the software, okay? So if I'm doing animation, this is the animation area. If I'm doing rigging, this is the rigging area. If I'm doing modeling, there's the modeling area, okay? So depending on what you're doing, you can use the Hotbox, you can use the menus at the top. Whatever makes you work quickest is what you want to use, okay? Initially, this is going to be the quickest because that's just you're new, but just try to get used to using this. The more you use it, the faster it's going to go, okay? Below that, we have this thing, which is the status line. So this will help us select things. If we wanted to select points or faces or edges inside Cinema, we have that little toggle bar on the left-hand side where we can pick which one we want. Inside Maya, they have it hidden. It's hard to see, but there's a line with a little arrow. If you click on that, it opens this up. This is the selection mask. So basically, if I had lights, cameras, geometry, dynamic things, whatever in my scene, I could isolate which one specifically I wanted to select. If I'm doing animation, I may not want to select cameras right now or lights. I may just want to select geometry or joints or something like that. So I could turn on and off these things here to grab exactly what I want to do. Oops. I think I want that or that. I also have this, which is component versus object, okay? So let's create an object just so we can see it. Yes, sir?
Those don't seem to be appearing on my thing. All I got is...
Do you have this arrow here?
Oh. Thanks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Maya will hide everything because it's very customizable and it's very easy to move stuff and hide stuff and delete stuff. So from here, where it says polygon modeling, there's a bunch of objects. Just click on any one of those objects on the left side. Okay. Then at the top, you'll see these three buttons. One looks like a hierarchy button. One looks like a couple shapes. And then one looks like 4 squares and a blue one. Click on the 4 squares and blue one.
I clicked on the left, but all it's giving me is this window.
You'll see the item go into this like purple and blue mode. This is the button that we would use to get into component mode to select points or faces or edges or any of that stuff, okay? Click back in the middle one, and it takes us back to object mode. It's a little bit easier to switch inside the software between components, which is what that was, and objects, which is what this is. Also, Maya is very color friendly. The more stuff that we do, the more you'll see how they've color-coded basically everything that you do. So when you're in this mode, it's purple and blue. We know we're in component mode. When we're in this mode, typically we're going to be green and white, and now we'll know we're in object mode, okay? And then depending on what we wanted to select, that's what these things are for here. Right now it's on points. If I clicked edges or faces or whatever. Okay, so that's what that area up there is for. There's also some snapping, some symmetry things, different rendering things we'll get into. This area where we click that object, that's called the shelf. And what we want to do is that's a customizable area. We want to customize that to add some features that we're going to constantly be using every single class. So one of these shelf tabs is called custom. Find the custom tab. Okay, we want to add some things to this tab that we will be using throughout the software, okay? The way we add stuff is we hold Control and Shift, okay? So hold Control and Shift on your keyboard, and then go to Edit, Delete by Type, and then History, and just click on it, and then let go of Control Shift, and then just click back in the viewport. So hold Control Shift, Edit, Delete by Type, History, let go of Control and Shift, and just click in your viewport. If you do it correctly, you should see this new button show up inside your custom shelf, right? It says History. Anyone not have it? Good. That's how we add something to the shelf. Anything that we do in the software, if there's something we're constantly jumping back to and we want to create a shelf button, hold Control Shift, find that button. So we're going to add a couple other things in here that we'll be using. So hold Control Shift again. Go to Modify and say Center Pivot. Cool. All right. Control Shift, and then go to Modify Center Pivot. Good? Okay. Let's go to Modify while we're still in there and say Freeze Transforms. Notice there's a square or a box on the right side of these things. That means that there's options for it. In Cinema, they had a little gear. In Maya, they just use a box, okay? So if you constantly are going in there and changing stuff, you may want to jump into the box, change some stuff, that way it's permanent. And we'll do that before we get into the later stages. Cool. So delete history, center pivot, and freeze transform are the three we have so far. Still holding Control Shift under Window Outliner. History, center pivot, freeze transform, and outliner. Good. All right. Still holding Control Shift, go to the animation editors and add the graph editor and the dope sheet. Graph editor and dope sheet. If I'm working at a studio and I'm doing animation, I may have a animation tab. And every time I go to animation, these are like the 10 things that I'm constantly using when I animate. If I'm modeling, I'll have a modeling tab. If I'm rendering, I'll have a rendering tab, okay? The more things you kind of customize, again, just a quicker we can work. And that's the goal of doing all that. Let's also Control Shift and do Expression Editor. Same menu in the animation editors. And I think that should be good for now. Okay. So we should have delete history, center pivot, freeze transform, outliner, graph editor, dope sheet, and expression editor. If for some reason you lost it, you can always get it back, just re-add it in there. If you've added too many, you can right click and delete the item. let's rename this custom shelf so it doesn't say custom. So we're going to go to the tiny gear on the left, go to the shelf editor, and then just rename it right where it says rename right in the middle. Just call it your last name. Okay, and then just so you can see it, I'm going to click on one of these and go to command. Every single thing we do in Maya is a command. When we make a sphere, it runs to the folder, finds a sphere program, and runs this program. We can call all of these programs from inside Maya. We can actually create our own little programs. Let's say every time I make a sphere, I want to make a sphere, move it up 2 units, and then color it blue. I can make a script or an expression that will do that every time. I have a button that'll do it for me, okay? And all of those are just right inside this command area. If you ever took a programming class, Maya has Python built into it, so you could actually do Python scripting while inside Maya, which again is one of the benefits of using Maya. It just helps you work faster. All right, so I'm going to hit Save All Shelves. So now I have my Sarcona shelf. On the left side here, we have all of our move, rotate, and scale. Maya's hotkeys are slightly different, just different enough to be annoying. Q inside Maya is select, just regular selection tool. If you hit Q, then you can select stuff. In Cinema, you had to be on the selection tool typically if you wanted to select items or marquee items. Maya is just default. You're in the selection tool and you can just select it. If I'm in the move tool, same thing, I can marquee things and select them still. The next tool is W, which is the move tool. Okay, you'll see the icon looks similar to Cinema's, but definitely not exact. It works the same way. You move the arrows, and that helps you move things around. You can marquee things still, so if you had multiple items, you could marquee them or deselect or whatever, which is something Cinema doesn't do. E in Cinema is what? I don't remember. Move. E in Cinema is move. E in Maya is rotate. That's where it gets annoying. So if we hit E, then we can rotate, and then we can rotate the item around. And then the last hotkey in that list is R, which is scale. It screws you up when it's R is not rotate. Okay. You also may notice that the way that I'm moving, rotating, and scaling this is a bit different than Maya or than Cinema's. In Cinema, we would create an item, and if we scaled it, it would scale proportionately until we hit that C button and then unlocked it so we could play with it. In Maya, it's defaulted that it doesn't do that, okay? So Q, W, E, R. Those are our main hotkeys for moving stuff around, rotating, and scaling them, okay? Similar, but again, not exact, just off enough to make us upset. On the left side, you have different layouts you can do. So if you don't like the 1-panel layout, you can switch it to the 4-panel layout. There's other ones underneath my Maya, but my screen doesn't show them, so it's not going to show them. I think it's help file or something. I don't use that. On the right side, these are our properties. So in Cinema, typically your properties are on that bottom right inside the box. Here, they're over in that area. They're a bit more useful inside Maya than they were inside Cinema. I'm constantly going over there and tweaking positions, rotates, and scales. Whereas Cinema, I just kind of did it all right in the viewport. Scrolling down further in here, we'll see where it says inputs, and we'll see where it says, in my case, polysphere. You may have made a cube or a cylinder or whatever, but whatever your input is, this item here is like how it was created. So you think about like in Cinema, you made an object and you had options to control what that object would look like, how many divisions it had, the scale of it, all that stuff. All of that is right here, okay? And if you click and drag right on the number area, you can actually drag it up or drag it down. It's like a little slider, but there's no slider there. Okay, so we can customize what that looks like just by, again, playing with those. just like Cinema, you have different options based off of what item you clicked. If this is a sphere, those are the options. If I make a cylinder, it has other options. If I make a cube, it has other options. Okay? Now, this is one of the cool things about Maya is that you can obviously do this stuff where you can scale it and still have these things here if you needed to then maybe change something. Whereas in Cinema, we had to hit that C button, which gets rid of this, before we could scale it or do any of that stuff. Okay? Further down, we have our layers. Maya has several different kinds of layers. These are display layers, just like Cinema's what's showing, what's not showing. Okay? Cinema also has render layers, what's rendering, what's not rendering, but those are in Maya in a different spot. So for now, we're just worried about display layers. Our timeline is on the bottom, just like Cinema has a timeline. Play buttons are on the side. You have work area, some scripting things at the very bottom. Click on the little running man with being chased by a gear. It's at the very right side and the bottom. So these are the Maya preferences. I don't know how deep your instructor got into the Cinema preferences. Usually it was just a couple things. But Maya has a whole depth of things depending on, again, your workflow as to what you might want to customize. We're going to set this up to do just like base stuff that'll help us. But again, it's your job, if 3D and animation is something you want to do, to kind of go through this at one point and just kind of like at least look and read what each thing does, even if you don't change it, so at least you're aware of it. So let's start at the very top and go to Interface. And just, I'm going to point out a couple things as we're going. So one of them is, here's that highlight. That box that popped up to the front said, you know, you can highlight things that are new. That's where I could turn that on or off if I decided I wanted it back. Under UI elements, here's all of my visible UI elements. Anything that's in this area can be turned on or turned off simply by clicking one of these buttons. Sometimes you'll accidentally do that. You need to be able to come back in here and turn the stuff back on. Okay? We don't need to go to help. Nothing in display. No. I think the next one we're going to go to is settings. Yep. So go down to settings. On your cheat sheet, how many frames per second are we dealing with? 30. So we want to set our time to 30 frames per second. Okay, anytime we animate, we're going to jump back into this thing at the start of it and make sure it's set to 30. You'll notice that Maya's up axis is Y. You can change that to Z. Some softwares use Z as their up. Let's see, animation. The next one we want to go to is Files. And I'm going to point out a couple things in here. Again, options if you want to use them. Number one is autosave. Maya will crash more than Cinema does. I don't think Cinema's ever really crashed. No, maybe once or twice, right? Yeah, once or twice this semester. Maya will literally crash 5 times a class. Okay, it's just part of the fun of working with Maya. One of our projects, it was what, every hour it was crashing on Sam and you. Yeah. Yeah. And sometimes it's just like a weird thing, like his would crash, but nobody else's would. It's Austin. It's all Austin. Okay, so I do recommend having that autosave turned on. Think about how often you typically save. If you don't save every hour, or if you do save once an hour, that means that you're fine going back and redoing that hour's worth of work. Okay? With autosave, you can tell it to save every 10 minutes, and that way, if you lose something, you can only go back 10 minutes worth of time versus an hour or 2 or 3. I have people who've lost an entire day's worth of work because they didn't save their stuff, okay? So autosave, I definitely recommend setting that up. Everything else in there should be fine. Let's Let's see, anything else that we need to play with? 30 frames. Yep, go down to time slider. Whenever we set our time to 30 frames a second, it automatically starts us off at frame 1.25, which is weird. So just set the start frame and the end frame to 1, or the start to 1 for each of those. Cinema does a good job of, in the timeline, you set keyframes, and you can see the keyframes pretty clear, and you can move them around. In Maya, it's not always as nice. You may want to take the key tick size up to, let's say, 3, and now the keyframes themselves in the timeline will be thicker. Again, that's your own personal preference. You can do it how you want to do it, but that's an option in here, okay? Even the height of this bar, you can set that to like 4, and that'll be bigger if you wanted it to be bigger. Under playback speed on time slider, set this to, yeah, play every frame is fine. Okay, make sure it's on play every frame. And then under max playback speed, do 30 frames per second times 1. And what that means is play every frame, but only play it as fast as my frame rate, which is 30. If we didn't have that, and it could play it back at 200 frames a second, it would. It would play back 200 frames a second. And then we would render it out, we'd bring it in After Effects, and it'd be like, holy cow, this is going a lot slower than I expected, okay? So play every frame, 30 frames per second, good. Undo should be our last tab that we need to go to. And Maya allows you to set how many undos you have. Typically, I leave it at 50 for me. New people, I would say maybe 200. You can set it to infinite, but it'll use up a lot more memory that way. Everything inside Maya, clicking on an item, deselecting it, those are undos. So you don't want to have 200 undos or an infinite number of undos if you've been working for 6 hours. So I'd recommend 200 for the queue size. Definitely don't set it to infinite. Occasionally what will happen is this turns off. I don't know what kind of crazy person is not working with an undo queue, but that's an option to turn that off. So if at some point you hit undo and it doesn't undo, it says it's turned off, you need to come back in here and turn it back on, okay? That should be fine, nothing here, everything else should be good. Okay, so then we'll hit save, there. That's good, that's good. Okay, hit Control A. This opens up your attribute editor. One thing that Cinema doesn't have is an attribute editor. A way to show, here is an item, and here are all the things that are connected to that item regardless. In Cinema, if you wanted to, let's say, turn the shadows off of an item, you would add a tag to it and then turn the shadows off. If you wanted an item to render blocky, you would have to add a tag to it and render it blocky. In Maya, it's all there, all by default. This is where it's at, is in the attribute editor. So we're going to take the attribute editor tab and just drag it off and let it float. Okay. Typically what I'll do is with my second screen, I throw my attribute editor onto the second screen. Okay. You can leave it in the main screen for now and just turn it off. Sir?
Is it, you said, got it.
Got it? Okay. So for our item, you'll see that we have a P-sphere 1, P-sphere shape 1, polysphere 1, initial shading group, and Lambert. Everything that makes that sphere look the way it looks is connected by those tabs up there. Eventually we'll play more with the tabs, but just be aware that this is the window we need to do that in, okay? So you can close the attribute editor for now.
It's under
Control A. Yep, and then just drag the tab off of the side there. You see it? Default, it's over here. Oops. And then you just pull the tag off.
I don't think it's
Yeah, none of this stuff is going to kill you if you don't do it. It's just better workflow, it's all, okay? Even next class you may come in, you didn't save your preferences. Well, you can rewatch the video or just move on without them, okay? So now let's close the attribute editor. And let's set a keyframe on our item, just so we can see how to set keyframes. So does anyone remember in Cinema how you would set a keyframe? Vaguely. The little dots next to the item, right? The little circles next to position or rotate or scale. So Maya doesn't have those. Maya has, here's my attributes. I can right click and key selected. I can key all keyable. Okay? So I typically would right click on something and then set keys and stuff. Or what I can do is hit this and then say set a key by hitting the S key. Okay, so click on your item, hit the S key.
Now I don't have that sphere thing anymore.
Click channel box here. Okay. So what do we notice about when we hit S? What happened?
Everything turned red.
Everything turned red, right? All those attributes lit up, turned red. Way down here where we have our ticker, we have a little red indicator. Okay, very similar to Cinema's, but again, not exact. In Cinema, you're able to grab the keyframe and just move it. We're not able to do that inside Maya. Okay, there's other hotkeys we have to use. Also, we never want to do exactly what I just did, which is set keyframes on everything at once. When we do that, we're basically, we have too much stuff going on. Okay, let me just show you a for instance. Make a clean sphere here. Let's say that I animated a sphere going from this side of the screen to this side of the screen. Okay, so that's all it does is it moves from one side to the other. Now that's 60 frames of animation. How many properties got animated? 1, right? Just the translate X. But all of these other ones also got keyframes. Now what that means is that when I go into something like the graph editor, this is an animation class, we're going to spend a lot of time in the graph editor, we get all of this stuff that's inside here, which can be very confusing and kind of like in the way. So anytime we set keyframes on something, we don't want to set keyframes on stuff that we're not actually going to be animating, okay? So S is extremely helpful to be able to set keyframes, but not this way, okay? Now we also could do like I did before. I could right click and say key selected, change my time, right click, key selected, but that is a hassle to do, okay? Especially if I'm out here and I just want to move this and set another key, I don't want to have to go all the way back over here and right click and key selected. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to the animation menu. So you're going to hold down your space bar. You're going to go to key, and you're going to go to the set key option box. Yep, it should be like right on, next to mash key playback. Yep, go to set key and then go to that option box. There should be key right here. And then set key at the top. And go to that option box right there. Okay. Now the option box is options. Depending on what we want to do with that specific tool, we can set things up. So in this case, what I want to set up is when I have my cursor on top of an attribute like this, and I hit the S key, I only want to keyframe that specific one. That way, as I'm moving and rotating and scaling and doing whatever, it's automatically doing it to just that attribute, not everything at once, okay? So I'm going to go and change this to all keyable. So I click the all keyable attributes. And then down here where it says from channel box, I'll click that as well. So I'm going to go to all keyable attributes from channel box, and then say set key. Okay. Now it might not do something. You might get an error, but that's fine. It locked it in, and now it's saved. So you can test it. So delete your item that you have in your scene, and then make a new item under create polygons, and then pick one of those things in there. Okay, then you should be able to click on an attribute and just hit S, and it should set a keyframe for just that attribute. Is it working? Okay, now all this is going to make your life a lot easier. If you have one keyframe or two keyframes, it's a lot easier to look at than if you had 20 keyframes or 50 keyframes, especially if most of those we're not using. Okay, so delete your item again, and then let's make a sphere. So create polygon sphere. We didn't talk about navigation yet. The navigation is the same as Cinema's. Alt, left mouse button does the spinning around, the orbiting, middle mouse button does the tracking, and right mouse button does the zooming in and out. Okay, so just hold Alt and you can do those same tools. So what we're going to do is we're going to move our sphere to one side of this plane. Doesn't matter where exactly, just move it to one side of the plane.
You said right mouse button moves around, but I'll get it.
No, Alt and then left mouse button. Okay, so we moved the sphere using W for the move tool, move it over. Whenever we animate something, we want to be very particular about how we're animating it. We never want to just arbitrarily grab it and move it over there. We want to grab just the arrow and slide it where we want it to go, okay? And I can verify that by my numbers in the channel box. And again, that's why in this software I'm using it a lot more than I do in Cinema. So for my Translate X, that's the only one of my things that has a number. Everything else is at 0. My scales are at 1, but my rotates and translates are at 0. Okay, if they're not, I can go in there and type 0. Now I don't like, this is a personal thing, I don't like the sphere to be like cutting through the grid. That's kind of like a weird thing. So I want my sphere to be sitting on the ground. So if I set my translate Y to 1, then it looks like it's sitting on the ground. Okay. So what we want to do is animate the sphere going from the left side or the right side to the other side. Okay. So if I want to move it from here and just have it animate to the other side of this grid. So which direction am I be moving this in? X, right? So I'm going to click on X. I'm going to make sure down here I'm on frame 1. And I'm going to hit S. Okay, so I've clicked my sphere, I've clicked Translate X, I made sure that my ticker down here was on frame 1, and then hit S. And then you should see your Translate X get a red keyframe in there. Yes? Yeah? Cool. Now, how long should it take to get to the other side of the grid? Any guess? 5 seconds. Okay. So 30 frames per second times 5. What frame is that? What was that? 150, right? So let's go to the very end of our animation. Move the sphere across the plane. Make sure we're still clicked on X, and then set a key. A key. So we set S again. Okay, so now if we hit play, you should see the sphere glide across the plane. All right, so there's our sphere going across the plane. It's pretty boring. Do you think the movement is evenly sped up, like it's all going the same exact speed every single frame? Or are some areas going faster or slower than other areas? What do you think? What was that? It is easing in and out, yep. So if you watch the start of this, it looks like it's like gradually picking up speed, going at a certain speed, and then gradually slowing down, okay? whenever we look at animation, you have to look at the entire picture of how it's animating. Let's see, ball animation. Okay, so this is a bouncing ball animation. If you look at where the ball is, each one of these shapes of the ball is the ball at a different frame. So as the ball is up here at the top, you'll see there's a lot of ball areas clustered in here. And then as it's falling, as it's moving faster, there's less of them. And then as it comes up again, there's a lot of them, and then a lot of them, and then less, and then so on. So as you animate stuff, you have to develop your eye for these kinds of things. You have to be able to look at something and see how it's moving, where it should go fast, where it should go slow, what you can do to make this look better. It's no different than animating inside of After Effects, except we're dealing with 3D, so we have other stuff going on. So let's say that I wanted this to go faster. What could I do to make this go faster? What's causing it to take 5 seconds? The keyframes, right? So if there's a keyframe here and a keyframe there, it's taking 5 seconds. How do I make it take 3 seconds? Yeah, move them closer together, right? Or whatever, move one. So, yep, go ahead and save. We could do that down here, but it's it's not beginner friendly, okay? The dope sheet is typically where we move keyframes. So click on your dope sheet, it's the DS. And you can zoom out just like you would inside Maya or Cinema, Alt and right mouse button. And you can pan left and right, Alt and middle mouse button. And we should be able to see both keyframes right there. We should be able to see the keyframe at 1 and the keyframe at 150. You can see those by black bars.
I see 'em.
Yep. Okay. So if you want to move something, what tool do you have to be in?
The selection tool.
No. That's for selecting things. If you want to move something, what tool do you have to be in?
The move tool.
Move tool, there we go. Okay, so what's the move tool hotkey?
W.
W. Same thing here. We have to be in the move tool to move keyframes. So we click on W, we marquee this keyframe. Now it looks like there's two. You just marquee the bottom one. Okay, that's the one you want to grab. And then middle mouse button, drag it to the left. So we'll drag it to about 60. You can see 60 is way down here. Okay, everyone able to move theirs? Cool. All right, so you have your other screen. Slide this over to the other screen. We'll be getting it back in a minute. And then hit play and then take a look. Okay, so now it's a little bit more apparent, it's more interesting. Yes, ma'am. Make sure you're in the move tool. Make sure you marqueed it, and then middle mouse button, click and drag. Is it the middle mouse you forgot or you didn't do? Yep, that's it. It's weird because Maya is like that. Sometimes it's left, sometimes it's middle. It's just getting used to. So that's 2 seconds now, right? 60 frames is 2 seconds. The ease in and ease out is a little bit more apparent that that's happening. Okay. So that's adjusting how fast it's going from point A to point B. Now let's affect when it's speeding up, when it's slowing down. Okay. So the dope sheet, we adjust time, where the keyframes are physically placed. Now we want to adjust the curves, so we're going to go in the graph editor, which is the other button. Okay, so this is where we're able to actually see this is the object animating. And we can see exactly that. It's starting off here, and it's plateauing, it's going really slow, and then it picks up speed, and then right at the end, it's slowing down again. Okay?
Mine's the reverse.
It might be. Depending on which direction you're going, right? So if I went in this direction from negative or from positive to negative, that's what it would do. If yours, you went from the other way, negative to positive, you would see it go the other way, okay? All right, we're going to do a little bit of view, high transparency. There we go. Graph editor stuff. So this and that. Okay. So with our graph editor, any area that we see is more horizontal than vertical is typically going to go pretty slow. So this area right here is going to go pretty slow because of it doesn't really move very much, and maybe even that area there. Okay, there's not a whole lot of movement here. It's barely moving up. That's probably going to be the same as this side. Okay, barely any movement going up or down. This area right in the middle, though, we have a lot of movement. It's basically at like a 45-degree angle shooting upwards. So we have a lot of movement on that. Regardless of what we're animating, it's going to be true for everything, okay? If we're animating rotation, it's the same thing. Very little rotation, lots of rotation, very little rotation. If we're moving something up in the Y direction, same exact thing. Z direction, same exact thing. Scaling, same exact thing, okay? The part that you have to be able to wrap your head around is looking at this as a graph that shows us how fast things are moving, and kind of ignoring the direction that they're moving, but at the same time being aware of the direction that they're moving. So this is moving in the X direction, which, if we look at this, looks like these two things go together. Oops, let me spin this around this way. There we go. So as I animate this, you can see that the graph at the top is moving in the same direction as the sphere. But when I rotate this around this way, they're actually going like opposite. They're not, they're going the same direction. It just looks opposite, right? If I was to animate something in the Y direction, it would do a very similar thing. It would just like, it would go up and down, but the graph would look very similar to this, okay? You don't do this, but I'm just going to do it so you can see it. I'll just move that there. I'm going to set a keyframe here, I'm going to set a keyframe there, and then I'll go in the middle and raise this up. Get bigger, right? Come on. There we go. Okay, so here's the Y direction, and it starts here, it goes up, and it comes back down. And you can see, same thing. We have these flatter areas where it's going to go slower. It's going to go fast, slower, okay? If I get rid of that one, it's just going to stay up in the air, okay? So it's just stuff that you have to be aware of as you look at these graphs as to how we can tweak them. So now what I want to do is I want to tweak this so that it goes very slow at the beginning, but then very fast at the end, okay?
So we're making go up and down now. Do we delete the movement from side to side?
No, you're good. I deleted the Y, the other stuff. So we're on the same page that we were, okay? So if I want something to go very slow and then very fast, what is the start of my curve going to look like? Very flat, right? So it's going to be like nothing is there, okay? And then what's the end of it going to look like? Yep. So it'll look something like this. Not exactly like that, but something like that where it's like this and then it goes straight up, okay? So I'm going to take this curve, this one, make sure I'm in my move tool, and I want to get access to just this handle. If I marquee and I use my middle mouse, it's going to move the entire keyframe. If I marquee just that handle and middle drag, it'll only grab that handle. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep moving that handle until this is pretty flat and goes into that curve. So give that a try. Grab the keyframe, grab the handle, and then middle click and drag. Make sure you're in the move tool. So now we get something that builds up the speed and then goes a bit quicker, right? It hits it at the end. Now, anytime we do animation, we really need to sell every piece of animation that we do because it's very easy for our animation to get lost. So this is actually maybe too subtle of an animation for this kind of thing. It's not very impactful, okay? So I really want this to look like it's slamming into it and hitting it and it's really forceful. So how do I make this go even faster?
Make it go,
How do we speed it up the first time? Move the keyframes, right? So instead of it being at 150, we moved it to 60. So let's move it to, let's say, 30. So I'm going to jump into the dope sheet, which is over here. I'm going to grab my keyframe and just middle drag it back to 30.
move the frames down a bit so it'll repeat faster?
Nope, not yet. I mean, you can, right? If you grab this, you drag this in, that's your work area. So you can do that. I'm going to enhance this a bit more. Whenever you tweak the dope sheet, sometimes it'll tweak that curve, and so I really need to straighten that up again a bit more. There we go. So now it feels just a bit more impactful.
I have sort of a bounce effect here.
All right, so now this is where we're at. It starts off slow and then goes fast, right? Now, if I were to reverse this, if I take this and make this flat and then I make this go down like that, what's going to happen now?
It'll start out slow and go fast? Or,
Yep, start fast and go slow. Okay, so understanding how to manipulate the graph editor to get what we want is how we get our animations to look good. Animations aren't evenly spaced. Whenever you animate a character even jumping or punching or anything like that, nothing is even. Everything is fast here, slow here, fast here, slow here. And you have to be able to blend between all these different modes because that's how the animation is going to turn out. That's a ball bouncing, right? Let's see. Yeah, it still should come up as that though. I guess this works, right? So here's a person walking. You can see that as they're walking, they have these big strides here and there. But in this area, they're a little bit closer together because you don't walk as fast in that area because of just how you're moving. Everything will have that same kind of thing. As you move, you're going to move faster in some areas and slower in other areas. Oops. Okay, so that's what we have to be aware of because everything that we do when we animate a character, we're looking at his knees, we're looking at his feet, we're looking at how each one is rotating and bending, we're looking at his hips, we're looking at his shoulders. All of those things have curves, all of those things have this that we need to go through and tweak. So obviously we need to be really good at understanding the graph editor so that we can apply those kinds of things. Now, do you see anything weird about how my ball is coming to a stop? It does bounce a little bit, right? If I were to zoom out of my graph, I don't see anything happening. If I zoom into my graph, very, 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 very subtly, I can see that this handlebar actually dips below that keyframe. So this is called overshoot, where instead of it going from this point to that point, that it goes like beyond that point and then comes back, okay? To exaggerate it, I'm going to grab that handlebar. Oops. and do that. That's what it's doing, but it's just a bit subtler, okay? And so now it's going really far past it. Now this could be a desired effect. If I'm doing something, I have a ball bounce, I may want it to bounce up a little bit further. I may want it to do that kind of thing. But in this case, probably not that much. And sometimes you can actually use that effect just to make it feel like it's hitting a little bit harder. Think of a cartoon. When they hit a wall, they don't just typically hit a wall and stop. They hit a wall and kind of bounce off a little bit, like there's a impact hit, right?
This reminds me of, you know, this is actually pretty relevant to the class. You know that, have you seen Guardians of the Galaxy 2?
Mm-hmm.
You know that scene where
But that's part of our goal, is to be able to simulate those kinds of things, right? I don't know what happened here. I have like an extra manipulator somehow. That was weird. Okay, cool. So let's look in the graph editor and see what some of these other things do, because obviously graph editor is an important tool. If you marquee your curve, or your spline inside the graph editor, we have set up a custom animation. Yes, ma'am.
How do I zoom back in on the graph editor?
Hit F. Yep, F will frame you. If you don't have anything selected, it should just get you right there. And then just make sure you have an item selected also. If nothing's selected, nothing shows up in the graph editor. If you've used After Effects animation tools before, or graph editor before, this one is far superior in its abilities, but it's obviously has a bit more of a learning curve. So this is our custom graph, this is our custom animation. Up at the top here, these are all different ways that we can animate something inside of the software, or change the curves of the stuff in the software. So if you hit this auto tangent one, this is going to go back to the default that we already had it set up to. So this is ease in, ease out. That's what it's doing. And you'll see it slows in, goes at a constant speed, slows out. Some of the other ones, we're not going to notice a huge difference. Okay? In this case, we're noticing a difference with spline. Spline is just going straight. Flat is not, or not flat, what is this one called? Clamped. Clamped isn't doing anything at this point. Linear isn't doing anything at that point. Flat is basically looking like ease in, ease out. Stepped is the only one that's going to be like radically different. Okay? That's what step is going to do. So it just jumps from like one spot to the other spot, to the other spot, to the other spot. Okay? As you get more keyframes in your animation, these things become a bit more apparent as to what they do and where you would use them. For now, we're going to be satisfied with just being able to go in here and just tweak them and do these kinds of things. And for the most part, these are starting points, and we would come back anyway and tweak them as we're doing it. If you're ever unsure of an animation, it's best to leave it all as linear, and that way as you animate something, it's going to go in a straight formula, a straight like this keyframe, that keyframe. So I'm going to animate just a quick little bounce animation. You're not doing this part, just me. Let me delete this. I'm just going to animate these two properties here and go to the end. And then go here. Okay, so here's my animation. Whoops. Nobody tell anyone I did that. There. I fixed it. Okay. Okay, so obviously this is a bouncing ball. What's wrong with it?
it's floating.
It's floating. The squash and stretch for sure, but it's definitely floating is the main thing right now. So let's look at what's happening inside here. And again, this is where people will get confused because of just like, okay, what do I need to focus on? What do I need to worry about? The biggest thing is being able to mentally isolate what should be happening for each one of these areas. So let's look at the translate X. The translate X controls what? What part of the movement is X controlling in this animation? What was that? It going straight across, right? So going from one side to the other, that's X, okay? So should it be slowly leaving and slowly stopping? No, I would say no, right? So let's make it linear. Okay, it's still floating, obviously, but it looks a tiny bit better. Let's go to translate Y. What is translate Y controlling? Up and down, right? All of our bounces. So where does it look the weirdest?
I think it's right at the when it hits the ground. So I think we should straighten those out.
Okay, so make them linear.
Or yeah, linear. Or if not, we'll make them flat. Nope. Yep, it worked.
Right? So this is us tweaking it. This is us being able to take keyframes that we have, using those buttons, using the handlebars, and being able to adapt to what these things should look like. Okay? Now, there's more stuff that's going to go into something like this. Obviously, this is crazy slow. It looks like the ball is like floating still, even though it's not floating. So this is where I could use my graph editor to really come in here and start to tweak what each one of these things is doing. And not only tweak that, but maybe even tweak this. Oops. And what frame is this ending at? This ends at frame 120. So I want to make sure that this animation ends at frame 120. So now let's take a look at this again and see. Okay, it's better. There's still more work that can be done, right? In the graph editor, that's where that work has to get done. I could spend all day and night in this timeline, and unless I'm going to go through and set a keyframe for each one of those frames, there's no way I'm going to be able to get that animation to look good out here. So you need to be able to master what's happening in here so that you can tweak those kinds of things. You need to be able to visualize what is happening in the real world, or what should be happening, and translate that information into a graph. Just to give you a for instance, and we'll actually have a bouncing ball assignment, so this will be kind of reviewed when we get there. But the ball is basically going like this weird angle. It should be going pretty much like straight up, like more of an arch. Right now it's like going in these 45-degree angles. So take these. I'm going to play with some other settings here. I'm going to grab all these ones at the bottom, and I'm going to break them. This one needs to scoot over a bit more. This needs to come up. This needs to come up. Now there's people that work in the industry who don't even use the viewport except to preview. They'll jump right into the graph editor and just start writing out all of their keyframes right inside here. There we go. So let's take a look at that and just see how that looks. Much better, right? There's always some enhancement that you can do to these to make it better. Now this doesn't have any rotation on it. There's no squashing and stretching. All those things would add to this. Also, I would really love it to kind of slam down instead of being like this. Depending on what kind of ball we're animating, obviously all those things would come into play. If this is a bowling ball, it wouldn't bounce like that. If it's a tennis ball, maybe. If it's a rubber bouncing ball, maybe it would kind of go like all over the place, right? So those are all things that we would need to consider when we animate anything, all the properties of the item. Cool. So sometimes you want slow in, slow out, obviously. That's what he was saying. But there's sometimes, obviously, where we don't want that to happen. When we did the bouncing ball, the translate Y these slowed in and slowed out the peaks, but obviously at the bottom, there was no slowing in, slowing out. Same thing with the Translate X. If I added that slow in and slow out on this, it might give it a different appearance. Let's shrink that back in. There you go. Right? Like right here in the middle, it looks like it goes really far forward all of a sudden because that's where that speed is coming in, is right there. Right? So right here it's going really slow forward in the X direction. And then right here it's going fast. And so it actually like goes like maybe too far forward for that. So you have to know when it's appropriate to use slow in and slow out. Most of the time you will want to have something like that. I'll also throw in there, if we have a camera, put the ball right here for a second. There we go. And I'm going to go to visualize. I'm going to go to create turntable. And let's say 120 frames. That's how long our animation is. Okay. Yeah. So now I hit play. You can see my camera spins around. Okay, now the camera's animation, that's like a button click inside Maya. Graph editor. Okay, this has a slow in and slow out of that camera. So what happens is, right at the beginning of this, there's very little camera movement, then a lot of camera movement, and then very little camera movement. As I look at where this is eventually going to go, let's say I have a demo reel, I don't want everything to start from nothing and then build up speed and then get to the end, okay? So typically when I animate a camera, let me jump back to my original camera. Where's this at? Right here, okay. So I'm going to grab my camera in here, set a key on this, set a key on that. There we go. There we go. I missed it right there, so let's just scoot that back up. Okay. I may have, for this camera, you can see all the keyframes I have here, holy cow. Linear at the start, linear at the end, and then I may have easy ease in the middle, or I may have one of these other ones in the middle of this, or spline in the middle of this. So in his sense, he's just talking about that one specific thing, but realistically, you have to know when should it go fast, when should it go slow, how do I transition it, and all that stuff, okay? So just use that as a precursor that typically everything has some sort of easing in and easing out of animation.
This video is based on the 12 principles.
Right. Cool. So we're going to jump back to this file. We're going to do a couple more things for just going through how lighting works, how materials work, and then we'll be done for the day, okay? So inside of Maya, there's a thing called I have to make it bigger so I can get to it. It's called a hypershade. And this little item up here will open up the hypershade. So if you click in your Maya view all the way up there, and you wait, there it goes. This will open up all your materials for your scene. There's 3 default materials that come into there: Lambert 1, Particle Cloud, and Shader Glow, okay? You never want to edit any of those. Those are the default ones. We leave those alone. We're going to make our own materials that we will then utilize. So under this Create area, this is where we can go in here, and we're going to type in Arnold. Oops, sorry, not Arnold. AI. That's what I meant to type. And if we go down to the, let me make that smaller. If we go into the left side, all the way under Arnold and all the way under Shader, you'll see all the different AI materials. We want to use just this one AI standard surface. So that's what we're going to click on. Did you find it? Right up here at the top, that little blue. broke it. You can go here. This is another spot to get to it. Window,
I'm not getting the preview model.
rendering editors, and then hypershade there. You're not getting this.
No.
Sometimes it shows up and sometimes it doesn't. This here will still give you that preview, okay?
I don't seem to have that either.
Nothing. Okay, so in this area here, you can type AI, go under Arnold, go under Shader, and find the AI standard surface. And click on that, and that will create an Arnold standard surface material. Arnold is the rendering engine that we will render all of our stuff through. Like Cinema, it has its own rendering engines. Maya has one. Arnold is one that comes with Cinema. On the right side here, these are all the properties for that material. So let's give this a name. So we'll just call this ball underscore M, ball underscore material. Yep, AI shade, or Arnold shader, and it's called the standard surface, AI standard surface. Was that? Next to presets, yes. Now, for this specific shader has presets that do come with it. So if you needed a starting point for something, you could use these as a starting point. If I wanted to make this a plastic, I can just go to plastic and say replace, and it'll replace all the attributes in here with that. But I'm going to go through and show just kind of the highlights of what we need to play with first. One of those principles was solid drawing. Obviously, we're not drawing physically inside of the software, but what it does entail for us is the ability to make sure that the materials, the colors, the lighting in our scene is created in such a way that our animation is shown off. It's very easy to pick colors and lights and angles that don't show off the animation. We want to avoid that. We want to pick good colors that help blend everything together. So don't go crazy with your color combinations. Just pick nice colors and you'll be a lot happier. So all the stuff on the area here, let me go through a couple of them. So we have base, and we have specular, and we have transmission. These are typically the three things that you may need to play with during this class. Base is simply color, like what color is my item. If you double click on the color swatch, you can pick what color you want your item to be. Okay, so just pick a random color. It doesn't matter. You can change it later if you need to. There's a weight to it. That's how much of that actual color is coming off or going into that. So this blue doesn't come off as that blue because it has reflectivity and has this diffuse weight at 0.8, okay? If I crank this up, I got rid of my reflections, then I'll be closer to that actual value. Typically, that's fine though. Then I'm gonna go under specular. And if this is something that's gonna be a plastic item, I really don't want a whole lot of reflection on it. I typically will take the roughness up to, let's say around there, 0.7-ish. And what this will create is just a nice plastic type material, just a flat color pretty much. The more detail you need or you want to add to something, you may want to add a texture to it. If I have a ground and I want it to look like wood, just like in Cinema, we would want to connect a wood texture to our color. All of these things here on the right, that's how you can connect files and textures to your stuff. Okay, for this we don't need to do that yet. Eventually we will. Under transmission, the weight right now is set to 0. If I crank this up, now I have something that's a little bit closer to like a glass material. You can see it kind of transparent right there.
Mine doesn't seem to be changing with what I'm doing with it.
The very top.
Yeah.
Yeah. This.
Yes, the iCam or whatever you call it. Flagstick camera, how about?
All right, so there's our material. Again, it's a simple material. any materials we want to create, we can do it inside here. This is typically the best way to do it because it's all like right inside there. I'll show other ways as we get into other assignments. But here we can see all the materials and lay them out. Now nothing is currently assigned to that ball. So if we scoot our hypershade over and then we middle drag that ball material onto the ball, it'll assign that material onto it. Okay, so now we have that ball material has that ball on there. Now I can close the hypershade. Just middle mouse button drag. Good. So let's create a floor. So just create a polygon plane. Create polygon plane. Just close the window.
Were we supposed to save a thing, or was it already?
It already saved. Yep, you just middle drag it onto your sphere and then you're good. Okay, and then I made a create polygon plane and made a plane so that we have a ground for our ball. Because obviously, or whatever it is we're aiming, we have lights, we have shadows, we want to be able to see those things. We need something to cast shadows onto. Delete these other cameras while I'm waiting. There we go. Okay, so you created a polygon plane?
No, trying to drag the thing onto the.
With the middle mouse? Middle mouse. What was that? Whenever I do a ground, in Cinema they have that floor button. You click it and you have an infinite floor. Maya doesn't have that for whatever reason. So I'll typically make a plane and I'll just make it enormous. Like if I'm zooming out, look how big that is. Okay. In this case, it's not terribly important. Just have some sort of plane there, and for future assignments, you can have them as bigger ones. Now I need a material for my ground plane. Okay, so here's another way that we can add materials to that. Instead of going through the hypershade, I'm going to hold down the space bar, go to lighting and shading, and then go to assign new material. So I hold down the space bar with the ground selected, lighting and shading, assign new material. Got it? Okay. Inside here, this is that same create menu or window that we had. So now if we go back under Arnold Shader, there's that standard surface. Okay? So in one shot, this is creating the material and assigning it at the same time. So I'll give it a new name. So this is called ground _ M. And then pick a color. And I'm going to pull the roughness up. Okay, so I picked a color and I pulled the roughness up. My floor now has a coloring to it. Which part? I assigned a material to the ground. Did you do that yet? Okay.
I've kind of fallen a little behind. How do we do the ground plane?
You hold the space bar. Or how do you create the ground?
Yeah.
Under Create, Polygon, Plane. And then you just scale it up. And then to assign it, you go to Lighting and Shading, Assign New Material, and then you find that AI standard surface. And then all I did was change the color of the ground, give it some roughness, and it's good. Okay. So if you don't have it fully on there, that's no big deal. Like today is just a play getting used to day. So, all right. So now let's add a light into our scene. Arnold uses its own set of lights. So I'm going to show this. Don't use these lights. Under Create, there are lights. These are not the lights we want to use. These are Maya lights. They don't work the same as Arnold lights. Under Arnold, which is right here, we're going to go to lights, and we're going to add an area light. Actually, not an area light, sky dome light. There we go. Oops. So Arnold lights sky dome light, and that will create basically a sky dome, this sphere that lights up our entire scene.
How do we get that eye outliner window?
Oh, you don't need that. If you wanted it, you just click your outliner button.
Okay.
We want to see what it's going to look like rendered. We click on Arnold and we say render. Okay, this will go through a progressive rendering. It'll look horrible, and then it'll get better and better and better until it hits a point where it's like, okay, we're done. And you can tell it's done because at the bottom it says 7 seconds or 8 seconds or whatever it is.
2 seconds.
Yep, whatever, however long it takes to render your stuff, that's how long it'll take. As I spin around in my scene, you'll see that the rendering is going to update as well. It may go slow, but it's updating as I move around. So this is interactive. As I move stuff inside my scene, I can see the updates right away. If my animation was playing, there it goes, it would update my animation as well. Again, it's going to go slow, but it's still doing it. I don't know what happened to it now. Where'd it go? Oh, there it is. Okay, so look at how in my scene, I don't know what yours looks like yet, look at how clean everything looks. We have definitely a background, we have a skylight, we have a ground, and we have the ball. It's a very simple looking scene. This, I'll show you a bad looking scene. This is the kind of stuff that I get. Color. How are you? Yes. So I'll get something that looks like crazy like that, and then on top of that one, that doesn't look too bad. But then the ground will also be like some crazy color as well. Some psychedelic craziness that just hurts my eyeballs to look at. Right? So it's like, it's too much stuff going on. It's very difficult to see the animation just because of how the animation and the colors and textures and all this stuff are playing. Also with this reflection down here, that's again, maybe too much stuff. So we have to be very aware. It's much better to go with simple colors, just like a color here, a color there, and that's it, versus trying to overcomplicate things. If you try to compensate for a bad animation with that kind of stuff, it won't come off, okay? People look at the animation and they can't see the animation because of that, then no point.
This already looks a lot better than Cinema 4D.
By default, it does. Arnold is a pretty decent renderer. Round. And I'm assigning my materials back on here by going to existing materials and just reassigning those, okay? So it's nice how they have them kind of hidden off into that area. Cool. All right, so that's enough for today. Let's save our stuff. So hit Control S. Oh, you know what? We forgot something. We didn't set up our project yet inside of Maya because we just kind of jumped in and started playing. We should set up our project. So go to File and go to Project Window. I knew I forgot something. So typically when we have a project, we have a project folder and we have all the folders and files or folders inside of it. Maya will set up all that stuff for us automatically. We just have to tell it where to do that. So under File, you go to Project Window. That opens up this window right here. And then we're going to click on New and direct it to our P drive. Okay, so I went to new and I told it to go to my P drive Sarcona 2540 folder. It should be under the computer here, or from the drop down, I think you can get to it.
My folder's not here.
Okay, and then you want to give your project a name. Every project should be labeled your last name underscore what the project is. So in this case, Sarcona underscore playing, because that's exactly what we're doing here, is playing around with this, with some of the tools, okay? When we get to our next project, we'll have another project, we'll create it, we'll add our stuff into there. All these folders underneath, those are the folders that it's going to automatically create for us, and Maya will manage most of our stuff. As long as we put our stuff into the right folders, it will do its job to help keep organized, okay? So Sarcona playing, it's in our 2540 folder, we hit accept. Okay, that makes the folder structure. Now we can hit Control S and find that scenes folder. It should be on the left side here where it says current project. If you go to scenes, then I can type in Sarcona underscore playing underscore 01. Okay, so on the left side you should see current project. If it's not there, if it didn't automatically put you inside of your scenes folder, go to the scenes, Sarcona playing, your last name playing, 01, and then save it. And then continue. Okay, so now we can close Maya. Sometimes it'll ask you, like, do you want to save again? Like I just saved. Cool. All right, then on the P drive, you should have two things that you want to back up. Number one should be that Maya folder, okay? That Maya folder, that's all your preferences. I would back that up because that's all your stuff that we set up today. Your shelf, anything in the animation preferences, all of those things are set up, so I would back up that Maya folder. And then I would also back up your W19 folder, okay? Not that we're going to use this file again, but you want to have your stuff already set up and ready to go. When we come in on Wednesday, we're actually going to start the first project that we do, okay? So throw those two folders onto your thumb drive, your hard drive, whatever it is, and then next class we'll come in and start working on our stuff. Any questions on that? Correct.